Hello everyone, welcome to the webinar. We are just delayed by a few minutes, just down to the wonderful technical issues that one of our panelists is having joining Teams. So if you can just bear with us for a couple of minutes, we are going to get started. But yeah, we just want to try and make sure that Kelly is with us as well. So yeah, just bear with us. For those that are still joining, I'm just going to say it again because you may think, oh, I can't hear anything. We are just having a couple of technical issues with one of the panelists getting online. So we're just waiting for her. So hopefully we'll get started in the next minute if she can connect.
In the meantime, guys, it'd be really great for you to pop into the chat box to say what you'd really like to get out of this session, because that would really help us with how we frame some of the conversation. That would really help Kim. So please do, if you could pop into the chat, what is it you're looking to get out of today's session? That would be fantastic. Jennifer's trying to sort it because the link was working. So I'm not sure if you wanted to make a start, Kim, because it's 5 past.
I think we should, yeah.
Kelly in.
Yeah, just mindful that we're kind of always running up to time on these webinars.
Yeah.
So make a start. Hopefully Kelly will join us in a short time. So just to begin with and say thank you to everybody for joining us today for our ASB Awareness Week webinar on social media, AI and the new reality of resident complaints. It's a topic that has come up in quite a few of the webinars I've either been on or been hosting this week. So I think it's a really good time and topical conversation to be having today. Just so you know, the session is being recorded. So you will get a copy later and it will be on our YouTube page. There's a opportunity for questions and answers, so you can put those in the chat and the question and answer box throughout the session, and we'll add those in, or we can at the end do a bit of a question and answer session as well. So let's do introductions first and then we can move into the session. So I'm Kim Logan, for those that don't know me. I'm the CEO of ADR Mediation, and I'm here to host this webinar with a fantastic panel. Thank you so much for joining us. If you can all just introduce yourselves, that would be great. Thank you. If we can start with Andy.
Thanks very much, Kim. So my name's Andy Moore. I'm a partner at MSB Solicitors, and I'm the head of antisocial behaviour at MSB. So I deal with a wide range of housing management issues. Thanks so much, Kim.
Thank you. Pamela.
Hello, I am the interim growth and strategy director for ADR Mediation, which means I look after all of their social media marketing and support of all strategy as well. So yeah, I'm very much aware of how much AI has affected things and the rise of social media. So yeah, thank you very much for having me today, Kim.
No problem. And Charlie?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Charlie Hamilton-Kay. I'm the Deputy CEO with the charity ASB Help, hoping to share a little insight into how social media and AI affects the victim experience.
Thank you. And Kelly just isn't quite with us at the moment. I do hope she can jump on as soon as possible, but we will get started. There's some comments in the chat, which I think is great regarding things that people want to get out of this session. We will try our best to get through everything, but very mindful that we're nearly at 10 past 10 already and we're on till 11. So I think it's something we could all talk about for days. So we really want to focus on and talk about how AI tools, online communities, they are impacting and shaping how people communicate. So whether that's through complaints or, even from the legal side, just how this is having an impact. So this is why we've brought the panel together today. And like I say, hopefully Kelly will be able to join us from a housing perspective soon. But just to get the conversation going, I'm going to ask Charlie a question first. So how do you think that social media has changed the way that resident complaints and community dispute emerge and escalate?
Well, I think, of course, it's added another layer to the ways in which people can both be perpetrators of ASB and fall victim to it. There's so much toxic behaviour that we witness on social media, and it really feeds into the cases that we're already dealing with. I think there can become a bit of a level of obsession with scrolling through to see what everybody's up to and to find out what everybody's doing. It's almost like the modern day curtain twitching, isn't it? So we used to sit and look out from behind the blinds to see what everyone was doing, and now we just go on Facebook to see what they've been up to over the last few days. So, but conversely, I think also people probably share too much, so they kind of make themselves more vulnerable, sharing where they are, what they're doing. In that respect. So I think we see a lot of cases where there's almost like a gang mentality that comes in. So if it's perhaps a neighbour dispute where someone might just post like, oh, next door I've had a party and we've had to listen to music all night and we're all exhausted, but then that's open to comment, and then suddenly you've got 50, 60 people who want to weigh in with their opinion and their experience, and then that kind of takes on a whole life of its own, doesn't it? So additionally, you've got to consider that pictures and statements and videos can be skewed and they can be misleading, and they can kind of sway opinion on what might be going on. There's always two sides to everything, isn't there? So personally, it is a concerning element that we have to really bear in mind when we're looking at cases, and really provide some guidance to people, I think, around how to navigate their way through that.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking, when you were talking then, Charlie, about like looking at the victim's point of view, do you think, and think cases that we sometimes deal with through the conflict resolution route, that they can get information to use against them? So if there is a victim, they kind of can go on, they can see perhaps who their ex-partners have been, things like that. They get a lot about their lives that they can use against them.
Yeah, it's almost like when someone will come home at the end of the day of work and review their CCTV footage for the day to see if anything's happened. And you try and explain to somebody, well, you weren't there. So even if that did happen, that's not impacted you. That's not been directed at you. So actually, similarly, sitting on, I want to say Twitter, I'm not old school, it's X now, isn't it? Or Facebook or whatever, trolling through to see what someone's been up to see if you can find something to beat them with. It's that's a really unhealthy road to go down. And yes, people absolutely do it. And I think when we talk to victims about providing evidence to support their complaints, we've got to be really careful with how we manage those expectations there and what it is that we're expecting them to do. But yeah, it's an incredibly dangerous tool. There's so much information out there, and it's so tempting to sit and scroll and try and work out exactly what everyone's doing, where they've been, who they've been with, and see if there's something that we can capture that we can use to our own angle.
Yeah. Did anybody want to add anything to that point from Charlie?
I think that Kelly's raised her hand. Let Kelly
go.
She's
Sorry. So sorry to be late. Far and really late as usual. I just wanted to add a little point from my perspective, just for something that we've experienced recently, about not necessarily seeing it from a sort of customer resident reporting perspective, but from an agency perspective as well, and them all having responsibility to kind of consider how information is communicated and what impact that might have, because we've had a case where some footage was put on mainstream television and it created a perception of really serious criminal behaviour, including drugs and weapons, which understandably kind of caused significant concern across the local community. But when it came to actually speaking to agencies around what actually happened, the evidential threshold wasn't met. So it created a really difficult situation from our perspective in terms of managing expectations. So I think I see it from all sides, but I do think other agencies have got a part to play in that as well.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. And pleased to see that you were able to join us as well, which is lovely. Thank you. Andy, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I think we've got there's an obvious trade-off with social media, isn't there? And I think if we look at the recent YouGov stats that have come out, that 63% of people aren't reporting antisocial behaviour. We've got clear benefits of social media there in that it's an important tool. And certainly, I think there's been a question mentioned there about consumer standards and access for people as well. It's a really important tool for access, isn't it, for victims of antisocial behaviour to be able to report antisocial behaviour. On the flip side, though, and I think Kelly, you'll have seen this in practice as well. What we get with the devil side that comes, unfortunately, with social media use is that we get individual staff members that can get targeted within social media from registered providers when they've got those social media sites set up. And I think as well, one of the really interesting things that we've seen, particularly this year, is the rise of TikTok and influencers as well. So that kind of influencer culture. So we've had one complaint about the condition of property, and that person's then effectively become an influencer, broadcasting about things like that. And then you end up with complaints coming into the organisation from all around the country, from people who are not, in any way, shape or form connected to that person, the property at all, but can kind of get on that wave, and then you can end up with organisations feeling quite overwhelmed, really, in terms of that. And you've got that keyboard warrior, haven't you? Protection from behind the keyboard, as to that anonymity is that all you're seeing is a name and a photograph, and it's difficult to then try and take action into what might stem into abuse or antisocial behaviour that's being caused by that person too. One of the other things that we've seen as well is now, some of you may have seen this, you might not have seen it, but public auditors, they call themselves. So they feel their role is to audit public services. Actually, it's just to frustrate, it appears, public services. But we've had a number of evictions now which have not been able to take place because you have had public auditors and their following turn up, and it's resulted in bailiffs being unable to safely carry out their jobs because of this effective following that comes with this social media following from that. So it's a really interesting time at the moment in terms of social media. I think the benefits and also unfortunately the burden that comes with it as well.
Thank you, Andy. Pamela?
I think that what leads really well on from that in terms of how we even begin to start to tackle some of these things is around speed and speed of intervention. Because with social media, we know that things go viral, and the speed in which they are shared, and Andy just perfectly said there, something that's happened in Blackburn, you've got someone in Brighton complaining on behalf of the person in Blackburn, and you've got hundreds, if not thousands, of complaints coming in. Quick intervention is a really important tool, and you'll see the amount of marketeers that are profiting over the speed of response. I'm going to use an example, Channel 4 yesterday saying, there might be something on at 6 p.m. tonight, but if you switch on to Channel 4, you can watch a chimney being replaced if you don't like football. It's that timeless, it's that level of quick intervention. So when, for example, and I've seen one of these cases of damp and mold, and they've used AI, for example, to really clue themselves up on AWAB's law, and they've gone on to TikTok and they've created some really articulate videos that will show the woes, the plight. It gets a lot of traction, and nothing being seen from the provider. And actually, if the provider took quick intervention with that person and said, right, we understand that you're on social media with this, and we absolutely want to tackle this issue. And I know that presents a challenge for providers who have got lots and lots of things going on, but this is where working internally with your communications teams becomes really, really important, because, you know, there's so much that can be done from a, you know, managing, you know, public presence and public space, but actually if it just looks like the provider is saying nothing, then that just builds the momentum and makes it even more extreme in terms of reaction.
Yeah, thank you, Pamela. Kelly?
I completely agree with you, Pamela. I think one thing that we're really noticing, and I don't know whether Charlie, you've kind of heard of this as well, is that actually a lot of the time, quite often we're not made aware. So the escalation sits outside of us as an agency, and actually multiple agencies, reviews, social media, Trustpilot, Facebook, MPs, councillors, they're all told and made aware. And then we have multiple requests coming in from multiple different places and people. And actually, we would have loved to have intervened earlier to prevent that escalation and that conflict increasing, but we weren't actually told. So I do, you know, think we've got a part to play in improving confidence for that reporting, because that will help that. But we're certainly seeing an escalation in, quite often, sometimes they're not our customers, they might be local residents and members of the community, and maybe they're not quite sure how to reach out. But yeah, we're definitely seeing a rise in those sorts of escalations, when actually we'd love to be able to intervene earlier.
Do you think, Kelly, I'll start with you as well, do you think that there has been a big change in how people communicate in housing, report things? So it's something that I saw in the chat around actual having a conversation opposed to then using email, like years ago. People maybe dropped into the housing office, had a conversation, or the local housing officer was on the estate, whereas now everything seems a bit more remote. Have you seen a change that kind of...
Yeah, I mean, I think we have, but I think it's very case specific, and I think it depends on the relationship that we've got with our customers and residents, and we really try to build that rapport and that trust. And when we are successful in doing that, we have strong engagement, in-person connection, those in-person visits, and they're so valuable to these processes. When I think we're seeing differences in how customers and residents communicate with us when there's more dissatisfaction around our response or our actions, and then there's we would only like to respond to you in email or on a certain day at a certain time, and then we're having to really tailor that response. I think that's more when there's dissatisfaction and conflict, rather than when we've got engaged parties who trust what we're doing and are working with us in a really safe space, which happens a lot, if I'm honest. That's where we want it to be. But that's what we're seeing, I think.
Yeah, and you've just got a thumbs up there from Hannah, something that's perhaps obviously seen by others as well. Did anybody else want to add to that?
I think in terms of the level of email volume, and I know in the chat there's a lot of people saying that they're getting a lot of emails which are really beautifully written because ChatGPT can do it for them, and Claude's really good, and Gemini, etc. Other AI tools are available. I think one of the things I say to people when they're looking at how do they respond to these, especially when they've got little factual substance behind them, or it's quoting law that doesn't actually exist, or isn't even in place yet, is to think about really bringing it back to the personal. And I think that I completely agree with what Kelly said around that strong engagement piece, but when you know that there's a high degree of dissatisfaction and they've retreated to using AI, or they've retreated to using what someone on social media has told them to say, which they've probably found from AI, that it's trying to bring it back to the person. And just in terms of like the simple ways of communicating, such as, using common relatable points. So, I understand about the situation that you incurred on X and how that must have been distressing for you. I can see that you've also raised several other points, but let's bring it to this initial point and trying to keep anchoring people back to what the information is rather than the sort of fluff of the AI, which is difficult when you've been faced with a 4-page, document that is absolutely, perfectly written. I think the other thing I'd say as well in terms of the change in communication is we have a bit of judgment now. Like you see something that is reams and reams of text and you're like, it's another AI written complaint. And maybe just removing some of that judgment of this person has an issue and let's strip it back to what is the underlying piece here? What is it that's failing or not working? And how can we work on that? And really trying to drill into the personal of that, as opposed to, oh God, it's another AI written, because judgment then can sort of sway how we respond.
Yeah. Thank you, Pamela. And I was just thinking when you were talking then as well, and Kelly, I mean, we've seen a change in our organisation that we do get people who come to us and say, we only want to mediate via email. And that, it obviously we all know communication through mediation is at the heart of trying to speak to each other or communicate directly, but it's a bit of a safety mechanism. Obviously not something that we do, but I do think there is quite a strong feeling from people that it's a bit of protection for them and they can use these AI things. Andy, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think it's been mentioned by Kelly, Pamela, I think, and yourself there as well. I mean, for anyone who's ever worked in a call center, and I've worked in a call center in the past, and and it'll be the same in your contact centers. You are the front line, aren't you? And effectively of getting the grief and the phone on there. And it's the same from email. If someone's going to let rip on you, it's going to be by email and it's going to be by phone as well. And I think going low tech in those situations is the most important thing, because, if you've got a difficult customer, if you've got a difficult client, getting face to face with them is so important. And I think if you get in, a raft of AI correspondence, or you're getting lots through on your socials, bit of old school housing management is get out and meet the person and speak to them and take, that layer out of it. You might get that afterwards, but it's more difficult for somebody to be coming back at you straight away with the AI tools, isn't it? Which I think we see a lot in complaints now, don't we? Is that we might spend a week trying to deal with a complaint, get the information together, send the response back, and then somebody can feed through AI, and within 5 minutes you've got another 4-page response back. And you can take that out of it, can't you? If you go out there and you do that low tech, the low tech methods is really important. And also, I think Kelly, you mentioned it before about building relationships. That's a fundamental part of it, because everyone can be really angry over email and by telephone, but if you know there's an actual person there, it can sometimes cool it down and pour a bit of water on it.
Yeah. And I'm sure there have been times when everybody's said or had an experience where they say, well, they're very different when you speak to them on the phone than they are on email. And that's, there are probably reasons for that, because if they may be typing it themselves, but they can kind of rant more, they feel more confident in that, or they are using other tools. One of the questions that's just been asked, and I think it's quite an interesting question, is regarding policies and whether these should be reviewed, changed, and where should organisations draw the line between constructive scrutiny and online pressure. I don't know if anybody would like to respond to that.
I don't. Yeah. Sorry, Pamela, do you want to start? I'll go in after that if you want.
Okay, cool. I think obviously it's always a good opportunity to review policies, particularly when you've got a really a vastly changing landscape. I think in terms of reflecting what's in social media, what's AI generated, and what's the level of acceptability. That's always going to be a challenge. It's always going to be subjective, but having a complaints policy and procedure that reflects the changing landscape 100%. In terms of the drawing the line between constructive scrutiny, everything you're looking at is around improving procedures, improving outcomes for people, and this is we need to get fundamentally back to that. But when it becomes about pylons and the creating outrage, and that's what a lot of content is doing now. The algorithms are geared to keep people on the platforms, so the more that they can feed the outrage or feed emotional reaction, And I think that's where the balance has to be. And that's where I sort of come back to that quick intervention piece, because if you can say, actually, we've picked this up with the resident. And that does mean housing has a TikTok account. We picked this up with the resident, and we're now managing it. Or you actually have that conversation with the resident to say about their social media activity and how it could actually be negatively impacting their case, and actually having that personal conversation with them, then that's I think something that could be really practically managed. But yeah, I think everyone should be looking at their complaints, because it used to be that someone would, as Kim said, someone would be walking into the housing office, or it would be on the phone, whereas now it's a lot more sophisticated emails potentially, or it starts off in a Facebook group, and the next thing before you know it, or it starts off as a TikTok post, and you've got international outrage, thanks Elon Musk, you've got international outrage at things going on. So yeah, I definitely think policies should be reviewed, but fundamentally putting outcome focused first, and a victim-led approach as well, in terms of this is about people and what's happening to people. And people don't, yes, you might get some of the auditors or someone that's actually there's an opportunity for me to monetize something here if I get enough views, but actually 90% of the cases it's that something's been done wrong to them, or something harmful has happened to them, and they want an outcome to that.
Thank you, Pamela. Did you want to add to that, Andy?
Yeah, so I think just echoing what Pamela said there, in terms of social media, I think social media is probably a bit easier for us in terms of catering within policies and procedures. We're a bit more used to that now, aren't we? I think than AI. So social media use and how it impacts the organisation, and from a staffing perspective, does absolutely need to be hard baked into absolutely all of your policies and procedures, and you've got your employer's perspective on there and things like that too. For AI, I've had a lot of conversations over the last couple of weeks with housing providers, and I've asked the question, do you have an AI policy? And the answer's almost universally been yes. And then the next question is, okay, well, what does it actually cover? Now, the policies as it stands, and what most people have said back to me, is that it only really covers staff usage and how they will use AI within the organisation and personal data. I've not come across anyone yet who has got an AI policy that covers externally how AI will be used and dealt with by organisations. How it will cover tenant AI use, how we will use it to scrutinise potentially complaints and evidence that are coming in. Now, the other thing, and most of this has come from, and I think probably a lot of the people on who are on today are seeing AI from a complaints perspective, and we mentioned it before about ChatGPT coming back and dealing with complaints in there as well. What your policies won't cover at the moment is how organisations will use AI themselves to then try and deal with that deluge of complaints and trying to deal with it as well. And of course, if we are using AI and it doesn't form part of our policies and procedures, well, everyone's really afraid of the housing ombudsman at the moment, and let's not shy away from that conversation on it. You're going to get yourselves into more trouble with the housing ombudsman if you use AI, but it's not part of your policies and procedures. So I think that's, from a policies and procedures perspective, that's what organisations need to start thinking about, is external AI and also AI use in terms of how we can start to use productivity and also improve outcomes for customers as well.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Andy. Yeah, I think that was really quite interesting actually when you said about the policies and what that does cover and actually what is missing from that. Did anybody want to add anything before I moved on?
Can't find the button to put my hand up, so I'll actually just put my hand up.
It looks lovely.
Yeah, just following up on what Andy said, really, that I think it's really interesting that any policies that we do have tend to be around the way we as practitioners would use those platforms, rather than how our customers, clients and complainants use them. And I think if we do start going down that route, we need to make sure that we're really kind of robust and straightforward with what we're setting out in terms of what would be addressed, what would be considered, and really manage those expectations, because it's a bit of a rabbit hole to go down, I think, isn't it, where we might suggest that the evidence could be provided, or that somebody could, you know, look at something, but then are we triggering that effect of, well, I'm now going to scroll through and see what someone's doing every single day and document it and obsess over it, and etc. So it's whilst it could be beneficial, I think going down that route, we do need to make sure that we've got those policies in place to protect us, you know, and to protect our clients with what we're asking them to do.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. So just to remind you, the questions that are coming in and the comments are really good. Some of them I'm going to just keep till later on, because it's talking about tools and tips. So I think we'll do a bit of a round of the panel at the end if they've got any tools and tips that they can share. But just kind of, we've talked quite a bit about AI. Just think about social media, and I think, like you said before, Andy, it is slightly easier to manage because it's been around for quite a while. Although somebody like me is on Facebook, I don't use all these other channels that the kids use, so wouldn't even know where to begin. But going to yourself, Charles, how could organisations respond when complaints, disputes, etc., are going into online spaces? Is there any tip that you could give?
Well, I think it actually comes back to what we've just been discussing. It's about setting some really clear parameters around what we will consider to be acceptable behaviour, what we would consider perhaps under the ASB umbrella, how we would expect our customers to conduct themselves if they're on social media. So, you know, we talk about good neighbour agreements and tenancy expectations that we set out when we're providing those initial agreements and contracts. And actually, this should be definitely included in that. So, as a tenant, we would expect you as one of our tenants not to be bashing your neighbour with pictures and rumour spreading, etc., or weighing in on conversations that haven't got anything to do with you. So I think we have to move with the modern day, don't we? That when we appreciate that new platforms are being used to portray ASB and to also fall victim to it, then let's make sure that we're including that in our expectations of how we want our clients to behave. You know, I always say it, and it comes down to the language. We touched on this last year with the guide that we released. It's about having those conversations with people and making sure they completely understand what you expect from them and what they can expect from you. And you know, yeah, this is the kind of modern day version of, like I say, I said earlier, of curtain twitching. We need to be aware of that. So we need to make sure that we're very clear about what we will accept and what we won't.
Thank you. Anybody? I think I froze, sorry. Did anybody, yeah, from your point of view, Kelly, from housing, is there anything that you have in place regarding social media or anything for the tenants and customers?
I think we just try to come back to the main point around us requiring to take, when we're talking about ASB, you know, our role is to take those reports seriously and keep our customers informed, take appropriate action, etc. Then they're not specific to requiring us to follow sort of social media narratives, but we assess the evidence and the impact. So I think, again, I think it would be on a case by case basis, but we just need to make sure that everyone's treated fairly, and that their voice is heard, really. And I think that requires things that we've spoken about before around, you know, time and that in-person connection. I don't think you can manage these cases without that, but also manage expectations around, you know, the advice that we give in terms of making that almost better, giving sensible advice about your response to that, because I think sometimes people they're kind of in that fight or flight mode, aren't they? And they feel like they need to respond to this via social media, and actually they could remove themselves from it, or they could respond in a different way, etc. So again, I think it's opening up that conversation, finding out exactly what's happened and managing those expectations for us.
Yeah. And one of the things that we sometimes hear through cases that we deal with is I've blocked them on Facebook, but my sister keeps an eye on what they're doing. So even though they're blocking them because they've been told by the housing, block them, don't, can respond, they've still got somebody else monitoring it. So it's a bit like you talked about the CCTV before, Charlie, that you get home and look at it. Actually, it's not impacting you because you can't see it, but you still want to know what's going on. So it's managing that with individuals as well, isn't it? Pamela? Oh.
I was just going to add to that I think, following on from what Kelly said in terms of when it comes to social media and pile-ons and, posts going viral, etc., is trying to get it back to the original story. Because what you see is the 2026 version of Chinese Whispers happen literally in a comment feed. Because what is one story becomes 50 different versions of it in the comments when people give their experiences or their interpretation or their opinion. So that human first approach of what's the original story here, what's been the impact, what is the outcome that you're looking to get to. Because if you notice on some of the posts that get lots and lots of traction, is that it's other people's experiences, then it's like, oh, actually, yeah, I feel like that too. Oh, actually, yeah, that's right for me as well. Well, actually, yeah, I hadn't thought of that. And actually that detracts away from what was the original story and what the original problem was. And so bring it back, and how, again, I just keep banging the drum of quick intervention, but that does require really good internal processes, but of bringing it back to what was the original complaint, how can we actually deal with that complaint and come to a positive resolution, or step towards a positive resolution for that original story.
Thank you. Kelly?
I completely agree. I also think it's worth opening up the conversation of what impact is your social media use having on you and on your family and on your home environment. Because we've had, I've supported some staff with some in-person visits just when I was just getting out and about with some new members of staff and for complaints visits, etc. And actually they were really, really valuable conversations to open up within that home environment. And the partner of the person that we were speaking to really appreciated us being that kind of almost that middle ground and recognizing that actually it was making this person really unwell. And the advice and guidance that we were giving was the same as what she was giving, but actually there's that, there's that relationship there. We were completely independent of that. And I think that really, really helped just to kind of open up and be honest about what this was doing, because actually it becomes a huge part of their daily life, and it becomes almost an obsession, becomes compulsive, and it can make people incredibly unwell, and that distorts facts, and it just makes everything so much harder then to deal with. And so I do think practitioners being confident enough to have those conversations around the impact of social media use is really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. I'll come to you in a second, Andy. I was just thinking on the some conversations that are happening. I've actually seen where social media has been used to personally name and shame a person working within housing, and the impact that it has had on them. And the housing act said we have no policy around that to do anything with it. But it's not just used about other neighbours; it's also can be used to kind of name and shame. But Andy?
That's a really important point that goes in with what I've just been thinking as well, Kim. There's some really good case, or particularly when it comes to social media pylons and the use of social media as well. Because I think as providers, local authorities, when we're thinking about how we're going to deal with this, when we think it's got out of hand, obviously we think about our legal tools, don't we? So there's various tools that we could look at for injunctions, potentially possession proceedings in circumstances as well. What we do have to remember is that there is a right to freedom of expression as well, and there is a fine line between what's acceptable and what goes too far in terms of expression within social media as well. There's some really good case law, and it's worth, if anyone's having issues with social media and protests and large pile on there, which came out of Birmingham a few years ago, and you might remember seeing it on the news in relation to the school which was running some sex education classes there, and some of the parents weren't happy with the content of that social media of the content of the education that was being provided, and there was a lot of case law that came out of that in relation to the use of WhatsApp groups within the parents, because there was attempts to try and shut down those WhatsApp groups and to stop things being said, and there was a clear balance on there in terms of what the court thought we could interfere with and what we couldn't interfere with as well. So I'd recommend, if anyone's thinking or dealing with those issues, or even framing policies as well about what's acceptable use, is to look at that case law that comes out of that. And there's some really good articles from Kulja Bogle on Cornerstones as well. They've framed out of that, because she dealt with it too. So I'd recommend anyone, if they're thinking about that, to have a look at those cases.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. So we've just been asked, would we pop the case law in the chat, please?
I'll just get the I'll get the citation on there and I'll stick it
in. So yeah, so we've kind of talked about that. We've got probably about 15 minutes or so left. So if there's any more questions, please put them in the chat, because I think, like I said, there's been some great questions so far. But just, we've talked about how it's affecting what's happening. But do we think that organisations are moving quickly enough with all the changes that are happening? If not, why not? I'll open that up to Charlie first. You're on mute.
Do I think organisations are doing enough?
Yes, they're moving quickly enough, with what's happening. Thinking about that, the movement having to move quickly with a lot of things, housing at the moment, and different things that are coming out. Is this? I'm
concerned it's a bit of a loaded question, actually, Kim, given all the conversations I've been having this week. From a victim's perspective, some yes, some no. I suppose it's a mixed bag, isn't it? Of course, it goes back to what we're always saying, that there's this postcode lottery. Every area is different, and the way every area handles its ASB complaints and the way it addresses it is different. So it's luck of the draw. I do think there's work to be done.
Yeah.
I think there is work to be done in kind of really understanding the landscape that we're now living in and moving with that as quickly as it itself is moving. There's newer problems every single day, and we need to just be very adaptable to understand that and appreciate what's impacting our victims' journeys. I'm not naive to the fact that of course there's always going to be resource considerations, training considerations. There's 100 other things that we've got to consider as well. Certainly when we're talking about housing, it's not just ASB. We've got, repairs, maintenance, all sorts of different elements that are just as important. So I get that. I wish we all had the magic wand to wave that we could just solve all the problems in the flick of a switch. We can't. But there is definitely work to be done in the way we perceive those challenges. So I don't think we should be looking at it as it's just another thing that we've got to deal with. We should be being a lot more proactive, a lot more motivated that we want to address those issues, instead of finding ways to deflect or put it off. And that's about as political as I'm going to get.
That's lovely, thank you, Charlie. And I think that the name of the webinar, this is our new reality, and we have to really review and look at it and put things in place. I mean, from your point of view, what are your thoughts on that, Andy? Do you think organisations are moving quickly enough? Do you think there's other things that could be done by them?
It's a really difficult one, particularly when it comes to AI as well, because I've considered some of these things recently when it comes to things like fake evidence and stuff like that. It's really difficult in the AI space to counter AI, and there's so much being set up in relation to dealing with that side of things. So, and we're not AI tech companies, we're housing providers, different organisations, public sector organisations, and I think we've got to be alive to all of the issues. Same with social media. We've started adapting our policies over time, and now we'll deal with that. At one point there was no employers covenants in relation to how you would deal with social media for staff. Over time, we've had to change that, haven't we? And again, you know, now we're looking at how staff are dealing with AI within the organisation. As I said before, then we need to look at policies about how we'll deal with AI coming in as well. So, no, I don't think the sector is moving fast enough. Charlie said something really important before, though, about taking really careful and considered steps as to how you would deal with things. And that's really important too. You know, like I mentioned before, if you're going to start using AI to deal with, you know, sifting through complaints and trying to boil down the issues and try and get to the bottom of things, just implementing that without thinking about things carefully and how you'll use it and your policies and procedures to back it is going to be foolhardy, and you'll end up in trouble with doing that. So no, we're probably not moving fast enough, but similar to what Charlie said earlier, but we have to take really considered, sensible steps when we're doing it.
Yeah. And I think a comment that's just been put in the chat that with AI progressing on a daily basis, it's really difficult to constantly implement and recognise, you know, what's happening and keeping up with everything, unless you had a dedicated person to do that, because it would be a full-time job. Pamela, did you want to add to that?
I think what's important for us to think about as well is that we can talk about policies and procedures, but what's really important is to talk about internal ways of working, because when you've got something happening on social media, or you've got, you know, a complaint pile on about, you know, an issue, and your internal social media team is posting up, you know, 98% customer satisfaction last month, that timing piece of how your internal comms are communicating out, and the messaging that's being put out to what's the reality on the front line. I think that there's a real frustration from, you know, say the resident side of things, the public perception, that it not matching and not being sensitive enough to what is being then potentially channeled through, you know, through the public messaging from providers, etc. So I think that is something to be really mindful, and something definitely to take away, is think about how you can internally work with your comms teams, and how you can internally work, you know, with marketing, etc., to say that you've got an aligned approach that is sensitive to what's happening. We've all seen some really tone deaf marketing activities that have been happening while some really awful situations have unfolded this year, and I think that there's a real opportunity to, that doesn't necessarily, I completely agree with both what Charlotte, that was very formal, Charlie, and Andy, Charlotte's now looking for her mum. She's now thinking, where's my mum? I'm in trouble. But what, you know, in terms of that careful steps forward in terms of process, procedure, and, you know, as Helena says, completely agree that AI is changing on a daily basis, but the more that you can internally work together, then you're going to have better outcomes, because we need to have a sensitivity to that.
Thank you. So we've got remaining 10 minutes. So I think it'd be a good time just to ask the panel if you've got one practical change that you could perhaps say now that would help people improve handling the complaints in an age where there is AI. So yeah, if you had one practical, or you can have more if you wanted to give more, but one or two practical tips, what would they be? Can I start with you, Andy? Putting you on the spot now.
Two from me. So, and I think I mentioned it earlier, embrace low tech. You know, if sometimes we're not, you know, we mentioned before about social media and information and conflicting information and things like that. Embrace our old school housing management and low tech stuff. So go out and door knock and speak to people and try and find out what the actual issue is on the ground. Because, you know, when you've got a vast amount of information coming in and conflicting sources, and, you know, potentially falsified information coming through as well, using your low tech way of dealing with things, I think is so important, and building those relationships and stuff as well. And then for the second tip for me is to embrace the technology, because we are going to be faced with it being used on the other side as well. So I think we need to start being smart about how we will start using it within the sector to try and really make a better outcome for our customers, but also from a risk management perspective as well. And how will we use it, looking at novel ways to doing things. And I think, you know, this is the time to start upskilling staff within organizations about things like using AI agents and how they can be used and how they can be safely utilized as well. So not to be scared of it, to start training staff and to start using it in the right way as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Andy. Kelly, I'll come to you.
I've got quite.
I feel like Andy maybe stole
trying
your
to choose.
tip.
I'm trying to choose a few. I think sometimes I'm a huge fan of root causes, finding out what the issue is and moving on. And sometimes you need to, you know, utilize your experts within your organization to actually support you in that. So I think that's really significant. But I actually think on something we're considering, if from a complaints perspective, I think if you've got a customer and you're noticing a pattern of behaviour where there's so much dissatisfaction, maybe across multiple areas of the business, have you considered mediation from a business perspective? Because that's something we're looking at the moment and trying to maybe be a little bit flexible about. It's not something that we've done hugely. We usually use it I use it in my ASB service, but actually from an organisational perspective, to try and almost settle things down. I think that might be something that maybe we use more of as an organisation.
Yeah. And kind of just building on that, Kelly, it's something that we do a lot of, actually some coaching with the customer to begin with, to understand the why, what is going on for them. And then get that communication, because that's, you know, what it goes back to, get that communication going between them and the housing, the provider. So yeah, I think that's really key as well. Thank you, Kelly. Charlie?
Yeah, from me, I think it would be a case of, you know, go back to the basics of having the conversations, making sure that you're managing the expectations and talking to people about what is okay and what isn't okay and what we're going to do something about. But then on the other side of that, ensuring that as practitioners, we are experienced and trained enough in our settings to work with the times and the way that they're changing, so that we've got, you know, that we've got that knowledge, we've got that those policies in place around how we're going to deal with things. So, you know, coming at it from both angles.
Thank you. Pamela.
I get to go last, but everyone else has given wonderful things. But I completely concur with what everyone else has said. A couple of things for me would be disrupt the pattern. So if they keep bombarding with lots of emails, try and disrupt the pattern to, you know, Andy said about low tech, and Kelly said about in person, and trying to actually disrupt the pattern of how they're communicating. I think a secondary part to that as well is to test the assumptions and actually read it back to them. Because when they've got lots of persuasive, lovely articulate language being used by AI, they might not understand actually what's been put in that complaint. They might not actually fully understand what's, so, you know, you've said this, can you tell me what you mean by that? Can you elaborate on that? Can you tell me what you mean by that? And what was the impact of that on you? So that's a key thing for me. And then, you know, obviously early coaching, mediation, trying to bring in that your voice is being heard and your voice is important to us. I think that's an important message to be putting out. Helen's just, are we allowed to acknowledge that it is AI to our customers? You do need to have an AI usage policy published. It came into law. Andy's going to know this better than me. 18th of June, I think it came into law that you now need to have, you now need to be under the Data Usage Act that just came in. So it's worth checking with your legal team. But there is new legislation that means that you do need to have an AI usage statement published on your website.
Okay. And Kelly's just added another extra point there, just to say about avoid responding matching volume and length, keep it simple. And I think that's the key thing, isn't it? Don't get too embroiled in trying to respond into how they're communicating. So if anybody's got any last questions, you can put them in chat. Although, or I'll sum up. I think there's been some great questions, and thank you to everybody, because you've obviously, I hope you've got a lot from it. But I just think the key takeaways from today have really been around it's that communication, and it's sometimes breaking the cycle. And we've talked about, speak to them in person, pick up a phone, go out, have that face-to-face contact, keeping in your back of the mind how many other cases you've dealt with where you've said, well, they're very different when you talk to them in person as opposed to via email. Looking at your policies, reviewing those, are they including customers and internally, does it cover everything? I've used this word on every webinar I've been on, so I have to use it now. Curiosity, understanding the why, where is it coming from? What's led to this? Like we've talked about, is it somebody who's complaining a lot? Why is that? And the best way to do that is to have those direct conversations, and then managing expectations. What is okay and what isn't, so that they know that it's very clear what is acceptable and what isn't. So yeah, just a lot of people in the chat now saying thank you, found it really useful. Up to you all on the panel. Yeah, it's been great. I think that we've got a lot from it. We could probably do a load more sessions on this, but as a starting point, we hope that everybody that has joined, and thank you so much for joining. We know there's a lot going on this week, so it's fantastic to see everybody. If you have any questions after, please feel free to get in touch with us. Like I said before, you will get a recording or a link to the recording, however we do it. And yeah, I hope that everybody has a good day, and thank you so much, Andy, Pamela, Charlie and Kelly.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
See you later,
Take care,
everyone. Bye now.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.